We are the Agronomist Happy Hour, and what that is a podcast that we do, and we just talk about ag, and we drink beer while we're doing it. But it's gonna be really odd today to not doing this.
Something feels weird.
Not have any beer. But before we start, I'd like to thank the sponsors exactly for this event. So Sendak Co-op, MJ McGuire Company, and High Plains Equipment.
Is it on now?
And NDSU Extension for putting on another great event. So if you ever had us listen to us on our podcast, basically we just have a discussion about anything agronomy wise. We usually have a guest or two on there, and today you're the guest. So any of those questions that come up that you have a burning want to ask, I believe we'll have a mic that's going to go around. Right there, Lindsay's got it, and we'll go from there. But does your mic work?
I'm thinking so now. Everyone hear me? Okay, perfect.
I'll let Kyle introduce himself a little bit.
Jason, if you don't mind, can you come in the center so that?
Yeah, you gotta be in the video.
You gotta be, okay. How's that?
So, like Jason said, you know, we've done a few of these live now. Usually we have a singular guest, but it's fun to have the crowd because it kind of turns into
And hear you?
it's not working at all. Or now I got to just talk in here. Okay. I don't know what to do with my hands now. Okay. So we've done these with single guests. We've done quite a few of these now live. And this is a lot of fun to do. We do these generally as a Q&A session, but I always like to cue things up as how this last year went and how we see things going now in the winter going into the future. So, you know, Jason, what are the things particularly that you saw this year that I know we've talked about that are kind of the main, like what's on your mind that's happened from this last season?
So a big difference, at least in this area, was the amount of lack of moisture that we had that went late in the season. The season we got was an absolute gift for how late the planting went and how things turned out. We definitely were drier this fall than we were a year ago at this time, but we've got plenty of wet moisture. But I know that out soil sampling, the soil underneath the snow is going to take a lot of moisture. I know that's going to be the case. That's something that I'm going to be paying attention to. I think they're going to have the first Devil's Lake level rise or lake level prediction here. Everybody kind of pays attention to that. That's kind of an indication of how things go here in the basin a little bit. A couple other things that will be on top of my mind will be the amount of, you can tell the crop was big this last year because the amount of nitrogen residual was a lot lower. And that's in comparison to the year before. So that's going to change. I saw a tweet that I thought was very accurate. That said, someone said, it feels like I used to be playing poker and it was $5 chips and now the chips are all 100. Because the stakes have gone up that much on everything. So those are some issues. One thing else that comes to mind is probably how my rotation is going to fit this next year. And I had some issues I thought around some weeds that are going to be key of mine. Those are some things. And we did not have as much tillage this fall because it was so dry, which is everybody said after last year that the spring that we had that they'll never till or leave stuff unless it is tilled. And then we come in this spring and now it's dry again. So it's just, we got 2 years that are very unique, I guess. So from there, you can start drawing some questions. Now, Kyle's out in the western part of the state, and driving up here, I think the one thing you said to me was, you said you got a lot of snow, but I didn't know you had that much snow.
Well, if you look at what the road, the DOT website, and they would show road conditions and all that all through this blizzard, you'd look out west and we were whited out. So many times where we had the candy stripes, said no travel, all that. I was a little frog in the well situation, and we've got quite a bit of snow, but it is not like what you guys have. right now, where the ditches are level with the road in a lot of places. So you definitely have water to contend with and moisture. And it gets me thinking, particular just the conversations that I've had with Jason and others from out in your guys' area. And I think back to weed control. And so I know that it's on everyone's mind that this kochia thing is continuing to be a bigger and bigger issue every year. And so that's one topic that on that particular weed that I think about. And the other one is with all the water that you guys are going to be contending with, there's another weed that starts with water hemp, that I think you're going to end up seeing a lot more with just moving water this year. There's no question you're going to have more runoff. You're going to have more dispersal than you've seen before. And so I have to imagine you're going to be dealing with that more than you ever have in the past. Just with conversation with everyone, how you see a little bit here, a little bit there. Well, that's going to grow into a lot of it here and a holy crap, where did this come from over there kind of situation. And so, you know, I think instead of being reactive to things, we got to start thinking proactively on how are you going to manage that? How are you going to work around that? And there's a lot of really good information. And I know some of this will be through other speakers and roundtables at the seminar. There's some great information that comes from our own extension on how to manage something like water hemp in particular. But maybe chalk it up, Jason, to particular just the kochia issues that you guys are seeing. And then I'll kind of fill in as I go on some of the issues that we're having out west that may be something that's a precursor for things.
Any questions so far? Here's your opportunity to grab this third mic and ask away. See, this is why we drink beer on the podcast, right? Because everybody wants to talk. Kochia. I'll address that and water hemp. One of the things that I felt that I saw this last year, I had extremely good control with my pre-plant, pre-emerge type of products because we had rainfall. We had probably too much rainfall, but it was great activity. Couple of products that come to mind, I used a lot of sulfentrazone, used some metribuzin. I had very good luck with those types of products. My feeling is that on some of my post-emerge dicamba scenarios, I had better growing conditions this year than I did in 21, and I had what I felt were more issues. I don't know if anybody else is seeing that. I think it's just a matter of some of it is timing. If you're not using a the size of the weed, and then also just the pure volume of kochia. And we can get into that discussion. The other thing was that because we had such a wet spring, in my summer and fall soil sampling seasons, I found 6 new locations that I was asked to come to in, see here, we're going to be DeGroat Township, Morris Township, and it's going to be Sullivan Township that had water hemp this year. And it wasn't little water hemp. I mean, this stuff was waist high type stuff. And every location where this was at that I was asked to come, I identify it or I just stumbled across it. It was either in a low area slough, or it was a ditch, or it was next to a lake, where it's all the common thing is water. So it's something to be paying attention to. I have one sample that is sent in that it ended up being sprayed 3 times with glyphosate and dicamba, and the third time was glyphosate, dicamba, and 2,4-D. And I could pick water hemp seed. The plants were anywhere from this tall to waist high. So Dr. Joe Okke is currently screening that. So there's some concerns there as well. But that weed it's approaching. And I think as I was out soil sampling this fall, the field that the water hemp that was on was covered in Canada geese or snows and blues. And then they got up and they moved over to another field that I just got done soil sampling. So be aware that since that's a pretty big dispersal method is our waterfall.
Well, I'm going to pivot back a little bit here and just listen to the kochia thing Jason was talking about too. You know, we were kind of writing off 2 years ago as it was extremely dry, air was dry. How much of this was just drought stressed plants that were shutting down and not growing properly and absorbing herbicide? And then you just had the physical effect of dry air. So I think a lot of us looked at it like, okay, yep, drought conditions, we write this off. We go, nothing we could do about it. And then we come to this year, and the general consensus I'm getting from everyone is that, and from what I've seen too, for where I serve, we're not getting a handle on things. It actually was just as bad as last year. And so there are some other factors, issues at play. And if that's a growing tolerance to dicamba, continuing higher tolerances to glyphosate, we're starting to see where those combinations aren't working that great post. And so we have to start looking at things differently and manage differently. And we don't necessarily have, let's say, solid bulletproof answers either here. This is just I think our biggest thing is awareness that this is more than just an environmental thing that's happening, that there is true tolerances to herbicide and things aren't working as well. I mean, I'll share some experiences that are unique to me, but are happening for me locally. We're seeing less activity out of products like Spartan and Sharpen over time. And now I have my own working theory why that is. I still think those things are encroaching and moving their way east too. We have more of a soil acidity issue, and a lot of those herbicides have solubility issues in low pH. And so that's where we're dealing with issues. But I know a small group that have turned in seed that suspect that they've seen true resistance to Spartan, so sulfentrazone. And I think that might be a topic that's actually talked about later today from Brian Jenks, but I believe he was the one that did the initial work on this, but he's going to talk about AIM carfentrazone and also talk about Sharpen, and that actually comes from further west where they're seeing true resistance issues in kochia pre-emerge, not post applied, but true pre-emerge resistance. And so we're seeing some true problems there. And so you look at how much we rely on one chemistry for kochia too. I'm not saying I have answers. I'm just trying to, what I'm missing is my beer in here, a true happy hour discussion, trying to say, what do we do? What do we do differently? How do we manage a kochia control program? Can we do it with chemical alone? Do we have to do things differently? Yeah. Do we have to introduce a different crop, different tillage practices, cover crops? I think those all could come into play.
Anybody by a show of raise of hands had to deal with, is kochia concerned? Okay, as a comparison, how about water hemp? Okay, some, but probably not as much, right? There's a couple things that I'm one thing probably Kyle runs into a lot more in his area. I'm seeing more of it. It's moved east, is that fall application of flumioxazin or Valor type product, trying to actually manage it in the fall. Some people are using cereal rye as a method to combat some of the allelopathic effects and just keeping the ground covered so you don't have sunlight down there. Another concern that I have is I think paraquat is going to be under some intense scrutiny, as is atrazine. And those are two products that I'm really worried about. I think that are going to run their course through the EPA. They're just not going to be a long-term player. And they've both been very productive. I use a lot of atrazine in my corn, but acre-wise, but it's not a high amount because I want to keep the rotation flexibility. So there's been an EPA review. I submitted my response. I'd like to keep it, but it's not how the world works. So we'll see. Any questions from anybody? Thoughts or comments at this point?
Right over here.
All right. I'm Jeff Stockler. I'm the extension agent in Griggs County. And since everyone else is being quiet, I'm going to speak up because this weed issue, as you described, is spot on. We are in very dire straits. And thankfully, not many of you held your hands up with water hemp. Just make sure that you don't get the water hemp to produce seeds. You must. The only strategy we have left that will be effective is hand removal. If you go back in history, how did Iowa and Illinois in the 70s and 80s and early 90s continue to have weed-free soybean fields? Can anyone answer that question? How did they do it? Hand roguing. That's right. Pre-emergence chemistries were not working. We didn't have post-emergence chemistries in the 70s and early 80s. Thank goodness we came about with ALS chemistry and then Roundup Ready crops. And they quit hand weeding in Iowa and Illinois when the Roundup Ready crops hit the marketplace because they were very effective. And then they couldn't remember what they did in the 70s and 80s and just let the weeds go to seed. This is critical. The only other way, if we're not going to hand weed, is we have to hook that Harrington seed destructor on the back end of our combines. I don't see any other choices. If we now have PPO resistant kochia, and I believe in my county we have dicamba, high rates, the dicamba rates in Extend soybeans resistance in kochia and water hemp in Griggs County, it's only going to get worse. Herbicides is not the solution to this this problem. It's not the solution.
No, it isn't. And there's much less of you, it looks like, that deal with water hemp. So here are the things that I guess piqued my curiosity on how we'll all handle it as a group is two experiences. One is used to work with plot crews, and they were very, very, very good at their weed control programs. And they were very just OCD, spot on, seaweed, spray weed, came up with these ultra complex programs that try to control stuff. Never had issues with kochia, never had issues with other weeds. They all of a sudden get new sites that have water hemp, and they think, oh, we'll have this handled. We literally have the entire artillery to take care of this. And the comments from those guys are like, wow, we sprayed this 5 days ago with Liberty and it was dead. And then we came back the next week and it looks like there's a whole new plant. So water hemp, and I mean, we're focusing on water hemp because that's what we're seeing right now, but this Palmer amaranth thing is going to be a very similar deal too, where that's I want to say you know, a lot of the weeds you deal with proper herbicide and rotation, you're not going to have much issues. And then you have the varsity squad, which is giving you a lot to work with on kochia, but it's like you jumped into the pro league with water hemp and some of these other weeds. You've got to really be on your A game to handle things. So we've seen in some of the counties a lot further west by me, Palmer amaranth, that have been hand pulled and destroyed, but confirmed that's what they were. But the same comment from everyone that saw them initially, I just thought it was kochia. And so there was one, it was in Hettinger County, like a dozen plants, I believe is what it ended up being. And it got sprayed a few times with multiple modes of action, never died. Finally, then that's when they thought to call and say, we should probably have this looked at. And all of them were pulled and destroyed. But at first glance, you might just pass it off as kochia. In being, we're getting more tolerant to seeing more and more kochia patches kind of come in, you might pass by that at first glance and not realize that's what you're looking at. And then what's more scary about that is you talk to some of these guys that farm in Iowa, southern Minnesota, that have a lot of water hemp, and ask them about combining when they have a lot of water hemp out there. They become tolerant to what they see out there. Kochia is a problem when it comes to combining. You can feel it, you can hear it slug through the machine. It cuts pretty nice going through the combine as far as water hemp speaks. So you'll end up combining through that, not thinking much of it. So back to Jeff's comment there, it's like you really want to hand rogue that out, because you might swing into a patch of that not realizing what was that, and then just blow through it and disseminate in a whole bigger area than you thought.
And I agree. I think so there was more hands for kochia. We've dealt with that weed a lot longer. We probably get maybe used to it to some degree. Kochia, if you would hand rogue out kochia in 2 years, you're going to be probably out of that, because that water hemp and Palmer are not that scenario. So I think one of the things in talking about this just today, be prepared that you're probably going to see different approaches and strategies from your agronomists, from your consultants. There's probably going to be things that get split out. Okay, there's probably going to be increases in water volume. There's going to be probably different pre's or multiple pre's that you're going to be used. And I mean, when you're on fields, you're just spending time, because that's the one thing you're always, I'm always looking out for that, to make sure that doesn't get in, because then it becomes the problem that I just don't want to deal with. So that Valor in the fall, that's a management strategy. That cereal rye is probably a different look at a strategy. I think one of the things it feels like this funnel, like there's the one product that we'll always lean back on, and that's Liberty. I think one thing we found out last year, that all Liberty glufosinate is not created equal. Okay. And we ended up, we talk a lot about this on our podcast. When Daryl Richardson comes in and speaks, one of the things on that network on the NDOT is the Delta T. And that is extremely important, because you remember back in 21, we have low humidity, we have terrible glufosinate control. And we had a couple days. I can tell you the days that were sprayed on the fields that I look at in low humidity conditions, because that's where most of the weeds are at. And there was some changes that had to be made. Some of these other products that are glufosinate, they don't carry the same adjuvant package, and you've got to increase water volume. You can't sometimes even bring your own humidity with extra water, because it's not enough. That was one of the things I ran across last year.
Well, that's the interesting thing about Liberty, I guess you bring in, and for me, just like all the little dots connect, because we end up talking to a lot of Canadian agronomists, counterparts, and they just share about how they handle adjuvants and how we handle adjuvants with Liberty herbicide. So let's just pick on that one, glufosinate. So you look, a lot of our Liberty is what, a 280 SL. So that's your herbicide load that's in a gallon. Well, a lot of the Canadian product, what is that? It's a 150. I think that a lot of the Liberty brand is in Canada, and we're very strict on hey, you need to have a high load of ammonium sulfate to make this work, and maybe a little extra surfactant, helps round things out. But you go talk that way in Canada, they're like, oh, we're going to flash our canola. We will not touch AMS on a lot of on that 150 SL particular. So the reason being, now when he was talking surfactant load, they have that much more surfactant. If you start to remove active ingredient, now they can start loading up more surfactant in there. And so I'm going to kind of veering on this, but this is a good point to bring up too. Look at, so this is going on with glufosinate. Look at your glyphosates that are out there. We all started with a 3.8 pound or 4 pound products, and now we're running 5 and 6 pound glyphosate products. Well, a gallon a gallon of anything, a gallon of any herbicide, any pesticide can only hold so much stuff. So at the convenience of adding more active ingredient, something has to leave that gallon, right? You can't maintain that level of surfactant. And so it's back to this comment from Jason here. So as we're going higher and higher active ingredient loads, that's the thing that's getting the boot, is essentially your inerts, the things that would be your loaded part of the glyphosate, the more loaded surfactant that's would be part of a glufosinate product. And when you go to generic, something like Liberty, that's contact, probably responds a lot differently to the different surfactant packages that are out there. Now, I can't tell you that one's good or one's bad or one's different from the other, because a lot of that information they don't have to disclose. They don't have to tell you. That's where it comes. This is how many pounds of glufosinate is in this product, and then it's ... rest of the ingredients 100%. I mean, that's for companies, that's kind of the secret sauce, so to speak, on how they can maintain their formulation without someone, stealing that and taking what their proprietary package is or whatever. But as you see more and more generics, you may see there might be companies that look the other way and say, hey, we can produce this for cheaper. And the reason is the raw active ingredient probably doesn't change in price. It's the innards that go into the product. And so it makes total sense to me when Jason and the other consultants, especially right here around Devil's Lake, that you guys saw a huge influx in extra glufosinate, Liberty, that came in generics, and everyone's sharing different experiences saying, boy, this one product, I just didn't have an edge versus something else. So that's where my mind goes when I think on some of this, is that there is going to be variance in products. And so we're in the glyphosate side of things. It's a systemic product. And so as long as you can get it to draw into the plant, I don't think it doesn't jump out as much as seeing differences in the glufosinates that are out there right now.
Any questions? Gary.
Jason, do you see any potential problems with the crop rotations that we're doing?
So the question is there something where a crop rotation could help out in that scenario? Yes. So the more diverse that your crop rotation is, probably the more diverse you got cool season grasses, so barley and wheat predominantly in this area, and then you got another cool season broadleaf like canola. So canola is going to bring Liberty into your system. You're going to use other products in your cereals. Soybeans is a warm season broadleaf, and then you got corn. Generally, the more crops that I have in my rotation, the less issue I have with things that really keep me up at night, that type of thing. Where you get into some areas where it is dry beans wheat, dry beans wheat, dry beans wheat. You talk to many people where the effectiveness, particularly of clethodim, is almost not, it's getting to be non-existent. And if you can't get clethodim to perform, you're sure not having some of the other products perform either. So, I mean, we got foxtail issues with group 1 clethodim. I mean, and wild oats and snow, we've had that group 1, group 2 for a lot of years. So it's not just the big bad broadleaves. There's grass issues as well, But yes, rotation, where I have particularly corn bean rotation, I have way more issues with certain weeds there than if I have wheat and canola that get mixed into that combination. And if you got field peas and some other stuff, that kind of breaks it up a little bit too. Grant.
Where the strictly vertical tillage is being used rather than a field cultivator or something like that?
Question was, do you see any differences where vertical tillage is being used versus, say, a field cultivator? Depending on the type of vertical tillage, I don't see much weed control in that system. It's more field prep, getting a field to dry out, to get ready, that type of thing. If it's a coulter, no, you're not really weed control. You're getting that ground prep. If it's anything that's a speed disc, there's more, but not to the degree of say a field cultivator. Field cultivators to me are getting in like short. You either got a chisel plow or you got a speed disc or Coulter. There really isn't that field cultivator piece anymore. And there was actually a lot of spring tillage. And one of the things you could tell right away was if you had new shovels on or not, particularly sweeps, because I don't know how many fields, I got strips and streaks because it wouldn't close out. So
Tillage tools have definitely changed over time, and I guess my 2 cents is there's not a one size fits all as far as that goes. Like I really like the Coulter style vertical till tools, but purely on a field prep, residue sizing. So if it's a pass in the fall to chop up corn stalks or chop up wheat residue and try to just get things to decompose and get your, and then in the spring, it's just a great firming tool. You know, that speed disc, although it works things shallow, a discussion we got in earlier is, you know, back to weed control and how we can tie this into some tillage is, you know, what was old is becoming new again. And, you know, things like Fargo and Treflan and I guess there's always been sonolin use out here with dry beans, but more prowl again. And so there's pre-plant incorporated products coming around now. And being that there's more and more vertical till or speed discs and less chisel plow cultivators, where is your working depth at one versus the other? So your more vertical till speed discs are probably, you know, your first 2 inches of soil, where if you're running a field cultivator or a chisel plow in the fall, you're probably working down 4, 5, 6 inches in some circumstances. And so you look at, now again, I've got no solid answers. I'm just theorizing here, and this is kind of what we do, and we get talking on some of this, but you look at pre-plant incorporated products. You need 2 solid passes, 2 different directions. Usually one is a deeper tillage tool, and then one's a harrow going at a different angle to try to spread that out. But the idea is you're trying to put a concentrated layer where those plants are going to germinate and come up. Well, a lot of that information comes from back when we did that. We did a lot deeper tillage. There were more regular field cultivators, more chisel plows. There's a lot deeper tillage. Now there is more Coulter units, more speed discs, and everything's more in a concentrated layer at the top. So using something like a speed disc where you've got a row of concave discs going one direction and another gang going this way, that probably is a good incorporation tool for a lot of these herbicides. Like if it's Avidex or Treflan or Prowl, because that's the layer where your weed seeds are going to be sitting, because that's the tillage layer we've been applying. And, you know, and so there's this, I guess you just got to think outside of the box and think about this some, where tradition and where the data is and where everything's proven. I mean, I want to lean on that too, but then as you start to adapt and think about it, a lot of our tillage practices have changed over time too. And so I think there's a good place for, you know, something like these pro tills or jokers where you can flip dirt one way and flip it the next, and you could get a good incorporation pass at the depth that's going to be effective, where your germinating layer of, you know, if it's wild oats that you're needing a different mode of action or foxtail or whatever it is.
yes.
Yes. So the beginning of that, I don't know if I'll reiterate everything you said, but the last part of it was the concern is over if you're applying Valor in the fall or any flumioxazin in the fall on corn stalks, and you still want to do a PPI pass with that.
Yep. I saw that a lot. That was probably, I probably prefer if it's done in the fall, because in the spring, even this last spring that was very wet, there was a lot of stuff that got dry. It'll dry out stuff very quickly. And we had that, what was it, June 21st, that day it just blew like 40 miles an hour from the southeast. And it was stuff that got blown out that day. A lot of times with flumioxazin, the key is, you're right, there's all these challenges. You would like to have Valor put on the fall as late as possible to get the most benefit out of it. your chances of getting rainfall to wash that off corn stalks just decreases as the temperature goes down. So if you would put it on and get a rain, you could probably just leave it and direct seed beans into that if that's what you wanted to do. Using Pro-Till for PPI for a different thing, you were saying you were having struggles with that? Yep. Okay. It just depends, I guess, sometimes on the year, but I will always lean back to, I prefer to see a field cultivator if I could for a PPI. Even if it's, and a lot of these pieces of equipment now, if you've got it, are much more aggressive than the old style because you've got more rows on there. But I know that a lot of people still use whatever, Pro-Till, Quick-Till, you name it, that type of thing. It's okay, it's pretty decent, but it's still not what I think it could be, just because of I prefer to see more mixing.
I walked in a little late, but what about as a fertilizer corporation? I've always heard that, you know, Selfers, Pro-Tills, those diffs don't do the good job with fertilizer incorporation compared to a cultivator or a chisel plow or something like that. I got a grower that we work with that wants to start broadcasting fertilizer and try and incorporate ahead of his corn planting. He's curious if a Selfer's going to work. He says he can take his depth to 2 inches. And I said, I've heard not good things about that, but can you guys elaborate there a little bit, please?
You want to go first or should I?
No, you're gonna go first.
I was like, I got plenty to say about this, and I know that some will probably disagree with my line of thinking, and that's okay too, because there's no right or wrong answer in this. But in general, your Coulter style vertical till tools, although they look like they're
Well, let's pull up. The question is, if you're using vertical tillage, whether that's a Coulter or like a speed disc from a broadcast fertilizer incorporation standpoint, is that something that should be looked at?
So using vertical till as a fertilizer incorporation tool, I'm going to pick on this mainly looking at urea, looking at nitrogen, because that's where the bulk of your bill is going to be spent, is on that. And so there is actually good work on proving out how deep vertical till actually works soil, what they can turn over and bury. There is actually some good work that came from a lot of different tillage implements. Trying to think of her name in Minnesota. It's
Jody?
Jody. Yep.
Jody Dijon Hughes.
Yep. There you go. So she's done a lot of work with this that was really eye-opening. And then there's other supplemental data that comes along with this. But what you can truly expect for incorporation depth on, say, a Coulter style tillage tool is about 1 inch of soil. And so the whole idea behind incorporating your fertilizer, your urea, is to try to get that trapped underneath the soil. And so all I do is look at urea like that's slow release ammonia. That's the best way to look at this. And so you're not going to see the immediate effects of applying urea to shallow or on the surface and having it gas off, because urea isn't the form of nitrogen that the plant actually takes up. It has to actually break down the urea molecule, turn it into, it's actually ammonia and carbon dioxide, and then which that ammonia, just no different than if you're using straight ammonia, anhydrous ammonia, is going to attach to the soil. So if it sits too shallow, would you take an anhydrous ammonia toolbar and only inject 1 inch deep? You'd physically see the gas coming out. So you would, and it would be dangerous as all get out. I mean, you would know as soon as it was blowing towards you that was a bad idea. But again, that's something you don't see with urea, because it's a process that happens slow and over time. And so that's one part, is that soil can't trap it all, but we can be fortunate and get any amount of precipitation. So if we could get, let's just say, even a 1/2 inch of precip, we get a 1/2 inch of rain, that should be enough to incorporate most of that. And then you don't see any ill effects by, say, losing some of your nitrogen, just gassing off into thin air. But if we go to an extended dry period before we get moisture, that's where the problems could come about. And so that's kind of the direction that I always go on that when I talk on this topic, is that when it is dry and you have an extended dry period and you throw an inch of dirt on top of that, it was actually better in a dry condition to just sit straight on the surface. If you throw an inch of dirt on top of that, you throw whatever little soil moisture you have, and it's a biological process that converts urea. And so that starts the conversion process faster. It's sitting under a shallow layer of soil that can't trap all of that gas. And you'll end up losing a small percentage of that, or depending on the conditions, maybe more than that. But if we look back to like a wheat crop, I think this is the thing to reflect on here, is that we can get a wheat yield off of a little bit of nitrogen. But if we don't fertilize with enough nitrogen, we don't get the quality we need. And so that I guess that's what I always ask people back is, you know, was there a Salford or a shallow tillage incorporation tool that you used right behind the fertilizer spreader and you had a dry spring? You had the yield, but you didn't have the protein. So those things you on wheat, you might not realize the implications of it. It might just be in a protein thing that it's slightly off, because it doesn't take much to set up your wheat yield early in the year. And yeah, there's just so many biological factors that go into it. But I guess my long answer around there is I would still rather see some kind of deeper incorporation if you're going to rely on that. Or there's so many, just about every place you can buy fertilizer from, you can have it treated with something like agrotane. There's agrotane, and that NBPT molecule is sold from Coke to just about every business possible. So every retailer, everyone that handles fertilizer has access to that. If you want to handle your own fertilizer and have your own blenders, you have access to that. And so there are effective tools that give you basically like a 10, 15-day window to reduce volatility issues, where if you want to buy yourself a window, that's what you do. So if you say, I don't care, I'm still going to use the vertical till because it's better than nothing at all, I just suggest that you don't put naked urea out there, that you actually utilize some kind of a nitrification inhibitor as part of your program. You have to think of it like that. That, or if you're not going to rely on that because you don't believe that's a good idea, or you don't think that that's something that's economical for you, then you have to look at a different incorporation method, or you just get lucky and it rains. And that happens more often than you think.
This might, when they can't hear you, I talk as well. Thanks, Tom Gilbertson, for that text. My opinion is that it's totally the amount of soil that you can have on top of that urea too. So if you ever get behind, I know that field cultivator is slow, and a piece of equipment like a vertical tillage at Coulter's fast. But if you ever get behind there and see what's actually covered up, you probably wouldn't use some of that stuff. And anything that's covered, even if you can't see it, it has to have a certain amount of soil on top of it. And the worst stuff is any urea that is partially covered, because then the process starts and it's more likely to gas off. So, but you get a rain, doesn't matter. You could have done the worst thing possible in a rain. It's all good. Everything's fine. It's really tough to get all those things done you want ahead of time. Perfect. Another question, yes. Nitrogen management on all crops. Okay. So Yeah, it'll depend on the crop, but probably the biggest thing is you just go through and it was surprising this year at how well things yielded considering the planting date. So you've got to set realistic goals that you're gonna do. Some of that is, certain varieties that are gonna respond differently and how you manage them. The big thing is gonna be cost, right, of product and what you can do. We're very low this year on residual nitrogen as compared to last year. So that was, one of the things that did for me this last year is I said, I had a lot more barley and I had a lot more canola that went in. Now the contracts on both those crops played a part in that. We're gonna manage to try to do the best thing economically that we possibly can. I have some people that, we go off of soil tests and our zone samples, and we come up with our own recipe, what we know we can do on each particular field. And I think you have to manage by field, by zone. And then you have fields or situations where you've got ground that you can push things, and you might try some things later on. The elevation in price, particularly of all fertilizer, has really gotten tough, like around phosphate, because it's so expensive. But how to do the best thing agronomically, it just elevated the stakes a lot down there. I don't have too many people, maybe a couple that'll do some top dressing if the conditions permit. That we've got great stands, we've got potential for high yield. We'll tackle some of that stuff. So we'll call an audible in season. And so some of that is just kind of goes how the year goes. I guess that's one of the challenges of being a consultant, is that you have plans, you want to execute on those plans, and then things get rearranged with either changes in your rotation or the crop that you're going to grow. But I personally, there's no greater return to the crop than fertility. That's still the number one, in my opinion.
So, oh yeah, this is a lot longer. You guys can hear me up top now? This is probably the first time you can hear me this whole time. No, I mirror everything Jason's saying on a nitrogen management program. I mean, I'm so heavy in site-specific application. I mean, especially where I'm at, but it's the same exact here. There's just different reasons you're managing your yield levels. Here you're going to have more salinity issues and more water, excess water issues that have different reasons. Where I'm at, I have more eroded hilltops and soil moisture retention that leads us to having issues with yield. But regardless, there are different reasons, no matter where you're at, but site-specific application it's really the first place that I'd look. If you have equipment that's available to do it, or you have someone that can custom apply site-specific, that's on a nitrogen management program. Just for the pounds you use, the amount that's out there, and how responsive that is, it's extremely important in my opinion. Let's start there.
It really depends on the person, the equipment, how they run their operation. There's so many factors. I mean, it's just to just specifically say it's really tough, because I manage with some of my clients a lot differently, because they have just the way they do things, manage things, and then how we work together. So. Anything else? Scott's question was, feels like there's wild oat pressure that's moving from the north coming south, and there's borders of fields, some fields that have really run into that issue. Personally, I think I've got less wild oat pressure now, just because I think, well, I know it's because the amount of corn and soybeans that have gone in the rotation, those have really helped. But it's, as you move north, into Cavalier County, Walsh County, it's still a big deal. Because I think just because of the amount of soybeans that aren't in that rotation. Super aggressive weed, really tough to control. I've had some this last year that I know are group 1 and group 2 resistant. So we just have to manage around that. Probably the one thing that saved a lot of people this last year that I worked with was, and this happens all the time out in Kyle's area, is just we had the time to go out and do burn down. And burn down, I mean, it saved us. It was, between the pre and the burn off, and it was just a tremendous thing. So we'll see how this spring breaks. You know, when Joe Richardson comes in and kind of gives you a synopsis of the way we're going to start, I hope we carry some of those habits with us because it really helps us on those wildwood issues that we run across.
I've got just a little bit to add to that. As tillage practices change, obviously weed populations change and they adjust differently to that. So you might deal with different grassy weeds too. I know Scott was talking in particular to wildouts, but how much more foxtail barley or cheatgrass, downy brome do you deal with? Like, if I'm talking particular to a grass problem, for me anyways, it's more towards those species. And a fall burn down makes a world of difference. Even if we just get it on extremely late at the end and it's just glyphosate by itself, it makes a world of difference on how that works. And it's a far less expensive management option to use glyphosate in fall on things like foxtail barley and downy brome and cheatgrass and some of those that are going to come back in the spring because the alternate options are not cheap. Using the way that the whole market's moved, it's only getting more expensive as time goes.
I think we're getting close to our time here, but another thing too that just to pay attention, we have for this upcoming year, we started out, we had a very wet start, and then we ended up relatively dry. So people that I talked to, it was probably one of the best sunflower years they've ever had. And that was because we didn't have white mold and we didn't have a lot of, it seems like the blackbirds want to hang out as corn now, and they're not as big of a problem there. So if you're going to ramp up on soybean acre or sunflower acres, excuse me, just be prepared that if we get moisture late, we have a bigger chance for more sclerotinia. It was the same crappy year for flea beetles as it was last year. I don't anticipate that going down. We had diamondback moths that came in again. We got some grasshopper hotspots. We have to be very careful. We've lost some products in our arsenal on insecticides that are going to narrow things down as well. And that's a really good spot for resistance to start there too. So, and those things we'll just see how the year progresses coming on. See how our moisture situation, we'll see how early we start this year and go from there. Any final questions, thoughts? How you doing, Lindsay? What was how do I make my site specific zones? Is everybody doing zones here? There's some form of zones. So I work with, I think tomorrow Sarah Levis will be here with GK Technology. That's a platform that I use. I'll use multiple years of data, imagery coming in, any information that I can get in from my farmer that pulls data in is how I'm going to do it. I don't necessarily, it's not a sale type thing. It's more of just productivity that comes off of, because there's some variances out there. I'm different than probably you because you deal with something a little different in the no-till scenario, but that's generally how I got mine made up, I guess. How about you? If you didn't hear, she said that I'm right. She did not say that. No.
I would just be repeating Jason on some of that. I was just waiting for the answer. Is he said Sarah is going to be here tomorrow, and he goes, Sarah is who helps him make his zones. But yeah, I mean that's that, and I think that's all most of us do it. I think the first base step would be using multi-year imagery and overlaying and averaging to develop zones. And then it's just getting into showing those maps to either you know them because you've been on them for years, or it's going to the farmer that has it. You go, no, that doesn't produce quite like that, or this is different. And then you start to manually change some things. And I think the unexplained things, that's where Lindsay brought up the SWOT map thing. So using electroconductivity or something like SWOT maps, or that's what, an EM38. So again, it just reads the level of salt in the soil. So a lot of the fertility you put in the soil is technically a positively charged salt, but that's what they're reading, just full mass level of everything. But generally, you can look at those maps and something like that will give you a reading where if you have a huge accumulation of what I was saying, salinity issues earlier, that would show up on the map. And generally, that correlates to negative yield. So that's just another tool to help refine things. So I don't know if there's a one size fits all there. You have a good agronomist. That's how you make good zones. If you have someone that cares, looks at it, and doesn't just take it for face value, actually goes and breaks down into it and says, I don't like how this map looks. It should look different. These zones should be tweaked. Things should be different because I know for a fact this area produces better than shows, and it might be for a different reason from this area, even though they both show bad. I'd say how you make zones is you have a good agronomist for you to do the job. I mean, it's a complicated topic. I'll leave that.
We're right up against our time. We have lunch right afterwards. If you are bored this spring and you got nothing to do when you're planning, you can download the podcast and listen if you're that bored. Okay. And we've had all kinds of people on here. Dr. Brian Jenks, Dr. Dave Franzen. There's two examples that they brought some good insights. And then if we want to talk more face to face later on, hey, February 1st out on Devil's Lake, right off Woodland Resort, for Agronomy on Ice. We'd love to see everybody here. And it's a very social atmosphere. And we do just this. We just sit and talk ag and well, we tailgate a little bit too and that. So again, for myself and Kyle, we appreciate the time and the questions, and we'll be around here today and catch you later. So thank you very much.